My name is Thomas Richardson, and at 76 years old, I never imagined I'd be telling this story. For 41 years, I worked as a postal supervisor in Richmond, Virginia, believing that hard work and family loyalty were enough to earn respect. My wife Margaret and I built our lives from nothing, purchasing our modest colonial home in 1978 when redlining still haunted black families like ours. We raised two children there, Michael and Patricia, in that house with its creaking porch and Margaret's beloved rose garden that stretched along the entire fence line. Margaret passed 3 weeks ago. Cancer took her slowly, giving us time to say goodbye, but never enough time to truly prepare. The funeral was beautiful, filled with people whose lives she'd touched through her volunteer work at the community center. But as the last mourners departed and the casserole dishes piled up in my refrigerator, I felt the loneliness settle in like winter fog. That's when my children decided to have their family meeting. Michael called on Monday morning, his voice carrying that particular tone that made my shoulders tense. "Dad, Patricia and I need to discuss some practical matters with you. We're coming over Thursday evening." Not asking, telling. At 45, my son had become someone who made announcements rather than requests. Thursday arrived, with gray skies that matched my mood. I made coffee and waited. Michael's Mercedes pulled up first, followed by Patricia's sensible Honda. My daughter looked exhausted, as always, her nurse's scrubs suggesting she'd come straight from a 12-hour shift at the hospital. But it was Michael's companion who caught my attention. His wife Rebecca, clutching a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. They settled around my kitchen table without invitation, and I noticed how Rebecca spread documents across the surface like a general planning an invasion. Financial projections, market analyses, architectural drawings. My heart sank as I recognized what was happening. "Dad," Michael began, using that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate, "we've been doing some research. This house is too much for you to manage alone. The property taxes, the maintenance, the isolation." He glanced at Rebecca, who nodded encouragingly. "We've found a solution that works for everyone." Rebecca slid a drawing toward me. It showed my house, but with modifications. A basement apartment with its own entrance. "You'd have complete privacy," she explained with a smile that never reached her cold blue eyes. "We'd convert the main floors for our family, and you'd have this lovely space downstairs. It's really quite generous." Generous. The word tasted bitter. They wanted to take my home and relegate me to a basement apartment in my own house. Patricia said nothing, staring at her hands, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to oppose her brother. "The market analysis shows your property is worth considerably more than you might expect," Rebecca continued. "We could cover the renovation costs and still have funds left over for Michael's business expansion. It's truly a win-win situation." Win-win. Everyone wins except the person losing their home. "Dad, we know about the mortgage situation," Michael added carefully. "Mom's medical bills must have devastated your finances. There's no shame in needing help. This arrangement would eliminate your financial stress completely." I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. "What mortgage situation?" I asked quietly. "This house has been paid off for 7 years." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael's face flushed. Rebecca's practiced smile faltered. They'd built their entire argument on an assumption, that I was struggling financially, that I needed their help, that I couldn't manage my own affairs. "Well, regardless, the house is still too large for one person. The statistics on elderly individuals living alone are quite concerning. Most people your age would be grateful for family support like this." People your age, not Thomas Richardson, who'd managed a postal facility with 300 employees, just a demographic to be managed and relocated. I looked at Patricia, who finally met my eyes. I saw guilt there and uncertainty,
but also resignation. She'd been recruited into this scheme, perhaps reluctantly, but she'd shown up nonetheless. "When did you all discuss this?" I asked her directly. "2 weeks ago," she whispered. "At Michael's house. We were worried about you, Daddy." 2 weeks ago, while I was still finding Margaret's hair ties on the bathroom counter and hearing her voice in empty rooms, they'd been planning my future without me. They'd held a board meeting about my life and voted on my fate. After they left, after Rebecca's thinly veiled threats about conservatorship proceedings if I refused to be reasonable, I stood in the hallway for a long time. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, catching dust motes that danced like tiny spirits. I thought about Margaret, about the secrets she might have kept, about the woman who'd always been 10 steps ahead of everyone else. My feet carried me to her study, a small room she'd claimed as her sanctuary. Her desk sat exactly as she'd left it, pen resting across an open notebook. I pulled open the bottom drawer, pushing past old tax returns and greeting cards until my fingers found it, a manila envelope with my name written in Margaret's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a letter dated 6 months before her diagnosis, and as I read her words, I felt the ground shift beneath me. "Thomas, if you're reading this, they've come for the house. I saw it coming years ago, in the small comments and calculating glances. I've prepared something they won't expect. Check the safe deposit box at First National, box 379. The key is taped inside my jewelry box. Trust what you find there, my love, and remember, sometimes the only way to teach respect is to remove the opportunity for disrespect." That night, I barely slept. Margaret's letter sat on my nightstand, and I kept rereading it by lamplight, trying to understand what she'd planned. The next morning, I retrieved the key from her jewelry box, a small brass key taped inside the velvet lining where her pearls had rested. At First National, the security guard greeted me by name. I'd been banking there for decades. The clerk led me to the vault, and I opened box 379 with trembling hands. Inside were documents that would change everything. Property deeds, insurance policies, account statements, and another letter from Margaret. This one began, "Now that you know they're capable of betrayal, let me show you what I've built to protect you." As I read through the documents, understanding dawned like sunrise after a long night. Margaret hadn't just prepared for this moment, she'd weaponized it. My brilliant, fierce wife had turned my children's greed into the rope they'd use to hang themselves, and she'd done it all without ever saying a word to me, protecting me from the knowledge until I absolutely needed it. I gathered the documents, returned to my car, and sat there in the parking lot for several minutes. Then I pulled out my phone and called the attorney whose card Margaret had included in the envelope. "Mr. Richardson?" He answered immediately. "Your wife prepared very specific instructions for this moment. When can you come to my office?" "This afternoon. And I need you to prepare cease and desist letters. My children have been contacting real estate agents about my property without authorization." "Already drafted. Mrs. Richardson was very thorough. She anticipated everything." As I drove home, I thought about the family meeting my children had demanded. They'd walked into my kitchen thinking they held all the power, believing their father was a confused old man who needed managing. They had no idea that Margaret Richardson had spent years building a fortress around me brick by invisible brick, and now it was time to show them exactly who they'd underestimated. The roses in Margaret's garden were blooming despite her absence, and I stopped to touch their petals. "Thank you," I whispered to her memory. "Thank you for loving me enough to protect me, even from our own children." Tomorrow, the real battle would begin.
Gregory Santos's law office occupied the 3rd floor of a restored building downtown, the kind of place that whispered competence without shouting expense. His receptionist, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, offered me coffee with the warmth of someone who'd been briefed on my situation.
When Gregory emerged from his office, I recognized him immediately from Margaret's description in her letters. Mid-40s, with wire-rimmed glasses, and the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen every family drama imaginable. "Mr. Richardson," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Margaret spoke of you often. She was one of the most strategically minded clients I've ever represented." We settled into his conference room, and he spread documents across the mahogany table. "Before we begin, I want you to understand what your wife created here. This isn't just estate planning. It's a comprehensive defense system against financial exploitation. Margaret started working with me 5 years ago, long before her diagnosis." 5 years? I processed that timeline, remembering when Michael had started his business and when Rebecca had entered our family. She saw it coming that early? "She saw patterns," Gregory corrected gently. "Small requests that grew larger, questions about your retirement accounts, suggestions about downsizing that came too frequently. Margaret told me she'd watched her own parents get manipulated by relatives who viewed them as retirement funds rather than people. She was determined you wouldn't face the same fate." He pulled out the first document, a quitclaim deed dated 3 years prior. "Your house was transferred to your name solely, removed from joint ownership. It's worth approximately $480,000, completely unencumbered. Your children have zero legal claim to it." I stared at the document. Margaret had done this without telling me, protecting me with silence. What else? "Life insurance policies," Gregory continued, producing a folder. 3 separate policies. The first pays $200,000 to a trust for your grandchildren's education, not to their parents, directly to the children when they turn 18. The second pays $100,000 to St. Augustine's Community Center, where Margaret volunteered. The third, the largest, pays $350,000 directly to you. The numbers were staggering. How did she afford these premiums? "Side work you didn't know about. Margaret tutored immigrant children, translated legal documents, helped people navigate citizenship applications. She told you it was volunteer work, and it was, but she accepted payment in the form of premium payments to these policies. Very creative accounting." I felt tears building. Margaret had worked extra hours for years, and I'd been proud of her community service, never realizing she was building a financial fortress around me. "There's more," Gregory said, his tone becoming more serious. "Margaret documented every instance of your children's financial requests over the past 5 years, date, time, amount requested, reason given, and whether they repaid you. It's extremely detailed." He showed me a ledger in Margaret's handwriting, pages of entries that told a story I'd been too trusting to see clearly. June 2019, Michael requested $15,000 for business startup, promised repayment in 6 months, never repaid. September 2019, Patricia needed $8,000 for car repairs, promised repayment in installments, paid back $2,000. December 2020, Michael requested $25,000 for business expansion, said it was a family investment, never discussed again. The list continued for pages, totaling over $90,000 in loans that were never intended to be repaid. I'd known about the individual requests, but seeing them compiled this way revealed the pattern Margaret had recognized. "She also documented conversations," Gregory said carefully. "Margaret kept a journal of concerning statements your children made, not recordings, just detailed notes of what was said and when. Legally admissible if this goes to court." He flipped to specific entries. "Patricia suggesting you were getting forgetful at a family dinner in 2020. Michael telling his business partner that he was waiting for the old man's property to liquidate in 2021. Patricia complaining to her friend that Dad's house is just sitting there appreciating while I'm struggling with rent. Margaret heard all this? I asked, my voice breaking. She heard it because they said it in front of her, assuming she was too sick or too passive to matter. That was their mistake. Gregory's expression hardened. Mr. Richardson, your wife created a legal firewall around you. Now we need to activate it. He pulled out prepared letters. Cease and desist notices to any real estate agents your children contacted. Legal notice that any conservatorship petition will be opposed with documentation of your complete mental competency. And formal notification that any attempts to sell, encumber, or interfere with your property will result in immediate legal action. What about family relationships? Is there any way to do this without complete estrangement? He leaned back, studying me with sympathy. Margaret anticipated you'd ask that question. She wrote you another letter specifically about this question. May I read it? I nodded, not trusting my voice. He pulled out an envelope and read, Thomas, you're probably wondering if you can set boundaries without losing our children forever. The answer is yes, but only if they're willing to see you as a person rather than an inheritance. The boundaries aren't the problem. Their response to boundaries will reveal who they've become. If they can accept limits with grace, there's hope. If they react with rage and retaliation, they were already lost to greed. Don't set yourself on fire to keep them warm. I learned that lesson too late with my own family. Don't repeat my mistake. The room was quiet except for the tick of Gregory's wall clock. She really did think of everything, I said finally. Almost everything, Gregory replied. There's one element she left to your discretion. He pulled out a final document. She purchased a small cottage in North Carolina, near Asheville, 2 bedrooms, fully paid off in a retirement community with excellent medical facilities. She set up accounts to cover property taxes and maintenance for the next 15 years. It's yours if you want it. A place to go if staying here becomes untenable. I looked at the deed to a property I'd never seen, in a town I'd barely visited. Margaret had built me an escape route, a life raft in case my children's greed made my home inhabitable. Can I see it before deciding? Of course. The property manager sends monthly photos and reports. Margaret visited it twice during her treatments, making sure it would suit you. She called it her peace plan. That afternoon, I signed the necessary authorizations for Gregory to send the legal notices. As I prepared to leave, he handed me a thumb drive. Security footage from various locations where Margaret documented conversations with your children. Nothing illegal. She filmed in public spaces where there's no expectation of privacy, but it's powerful evidence if needed. Walking to my car, I felt the weight of Margaret's love pressing down on me. She'd spent her final years building this elaborate protection system, working side jobs to fund it, documenting betrayals that must have broken her heart, all while maintaining a cheerful face at family dinners, pretending not to notice the calculations behind her children's smiles. That evening, I sat in her study and watched the security footage. There was Michael at a coffee shop telling Rebecca, "Once the old man is gone, that property is worth at least $500,000. We just need to convince him to sign power of attorney while he's still grieving." There was Patricia at a restaurant complaining to her friend that, "I love my father, but he's being selfish, hanging on to that big house when we're struggling with rent." I watched my children discuss me like I was already dead, like my property was already theirs, like my feelings and dignity were inconveniences to be managed. And I understood why Margaret had prepared all this in secret. If I'd known earlier, I might have tried to fix things, to explain away their behavior, to make excuses. She'd protected me from that false hope. The next morning, Michael called. "Dad, we need to talk about Thursday. I think there was some miscommunication about our intentions." "There was no miscommunication," I said calmly. "You want my house. I'm not giving it to you. And you should know that I've retained an attorney who's sending cease and desist letters to any real estate agents you've contacted." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. "What did you do?" "I protected myself, something your mother taught me to do." "Dad, this is insane. We're trying to help you." "Michael, stop. I've seen the documentation. I know about
The certified mail receipts came back within a week. Michael had signed for his letter on Tuesday morning. Patricia received hers Tuesday afternoon. By Tuesday evening, my phone was exploding with messages I chose not to answer. I'd learned from Margaret that sometimes silence was the most powerful response. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Patricia arrived alone, without Michael or Rebecca. She sat in her car for several minutes before approaching my door, and I watched through the window as she gathered courage. When I finally opened the door, her eyes were red from crying. "Daddy, can we talk? Just you and me?" I stepped aside to let her in. She declined coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the same place where Michael and Rebecca had spread their conquest documents. "I read the letter from the attorney," she began. "All those loans listed, the amounts, the dates, I didn't realize it added up to so much." "Neither did I admitted. Not until I saw it all written down." "I was going to pay you back, Daddy. I always intended to. Things just got so hard after my divorce, raising 2 kids alone on a nurse's salary. Every time I had extra money, something else came up." I sat across from her, studying my daughter's exhausted face. At 43, she looked older than her years. "Patricia, I never expected repayment. When family helps family, it shouldn't come with strings. But there's a difference between accepting help and participating in schemes to take everything I have." "That basement apartment plan wasn't my idea," she said quickly. "Michael and Rebecca came up with it. They just wanted me there to make it look unanimous, to make you think we all agreed you couldn't manage alone. But you showed up. You sat there silently while they tried to take my home." She nodded, tears spilling over. "I was afraid to oppose Michael. He's always been so forceful, so certain he's right. And Rebecca, she makes me feel stupid and poor and like I don't deserve a voice in family decisions because I'm not successful like them." "So you let them use you to hurt me?" The bluntness of the question made her flinch, but I'd learned from Margaret that clarity was kindness. Better to speak truth than let comfortable lies poison what remained of our relationship. "Yes," Patricia whispered. "I let them use me because it was easier than standing up to them. I'm sorry, Daddy. I'm so sorry." She pulled papers from her purse, printed spreadsheets. "I've been tracking my finances, figuring out how to pay you back. It'll take me 3 years, but I can do $50 a week if you'll accept payments." I looked at the carefully calculated repayment plan, at the small amount she'd carved from her already tight budget. This was the first genuine gesture any of my children had made since Margaret's funeral. Not grand promises, but actual sacrifice. "Keep your money," I said gently. "Use it for your kids' school supplies, for car maintenance, for whatever you need. I don't want repayment. I want honesty and respect." "I can give you that. Daddy, Mom tried to warn me about how Michael was changing. She told me 3 years ago that he was starting to see you as a resource instead of a father. I didn't want to believe her. I thought she was being dramatic." "She wasn't dramatic. She was observant." Patricia wiped her eyes. "The letter from your attorney mentioned documentation, recordings, evidence. How much did Mom know?" "Everything. She documented every loan request, every concerning comment, every time you or Michael treated me like an inheritance instead of a person. She spent the last 5 years building legal protections I didn't know I needed." "God, I must have seemed so awful to her at the end." "You seemed conflicted," I corrected. "She documented Michael and Rebecca's calculating behavior extensively.
Your name appeared less frequently, usually in contexts where you were clearly uncomfortable. She knew you were caught in the middle. Is there any way to fix this, Daddy? Not the money stuff, that's between you and Michael, but you and me? I considered the question carefully. Margaret's letter had said that boundaries would reveal who my children had become. Patricia was here, alone, crying, apologizing, offering what she could afford even though I didn't want it. These were the actions of someone genuinely remorseful. Yes, I said finally, we can fix this, but it requires complete honesty going forward. No more silent complicity when Michael proposes schemes. No more treating me like I'm too old to understand my own finances. Can you do that? Yes, she said firmly. I can do that. I will do that. We talked for another hour, carefully and honestly. She told me about the pressure Michael had been applying, threatening to exclude her from family decisions if she didn't support his plans. She described how Rebecca had a way of making everyone feel inadequate unless they agreed with her. She admitted she'd been afraid of losing what remained of our family if she opposed them. You weren't going to lose me by opposing them, I told her. You were losing me by joining them. After Patricia left, I felt cautiously hopeful. Maybe everything wasn't irreparably broken. Maybe some relationships could survive boundary setting if both people were willing to do the hard work of honesty. That optimism lasted exactly 6 hours. At 4:30 that afternoon, Michael and Rebecca arrived unannounced. But they weren't alone. A man in an expensive suit emerged from their Mercedes carrying a briefcase that screams legal authority. They marched to my door with the energy of people who believed they held the winning hand. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. Michael, Rebecca, and you are... Charles Whitmore, the suit said, extending his hand with professional confidence. I'm the Richardson family attorney. I believe there's been a misunderstanding about your living situation that we can clear up. There's no misunderstanding, I said, not shaking his hand. And I have my own attorney. You can coordinate with him if you have legal matters to discuss. Dad, stop being difficult, Michael said, pushing past me into my house. The other two followed, and suddenly my living room felt crowded with hostile energy. Rebecca pulled out her own documents. James, we've consulted with Charles about the best way to proceed. Given your recent behavior, hiring an attorney without family consultation, making accusations about our intentions, we're concerned about your judgment. My judgment is fine. Is it? Charles asked smoothly. Mr. Richardson, sudden personality changes, paranoid ideation, and irrational financial decisions can all be signs of diminished capacity. Your children are simply concerned for your welfare. The implication was clear. They were building a case for conservatorship using my self-defense as evidence of incompetence. Margaret had predicted this exact strategy. Get out of my house, I said calmly. All three of you. Dad, we're trying to help you, Michael said, his voice rising. Mom's death has affected you more than you realize. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, and I'm telling you to leave. Rebecca's mask of concern slipped, revealing the calculation beneath. If we force you to pursue legal guardianship, the court will examine your finances very closely. They'll see all those unexplained loans, the sudden hiring of an attorney, the paranoid accusations. It won't look good. I pulled out my phone and pressed record. Say that again, please. The part about forcing legal guardianship? Charles blanched. Michael took a step back. But Rebecca, foolish in her arrogance, leaned forward. We're simply looking out for your best interests, making sure you don't make costly mistakes in your grief. Costly to whom? I asked, still recording. Costly to me or costly to your renovation plans? This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking we're talking about. Michael, you're making us out to be villains when we're trying to help. Michael, your mother documented 5 years of your increasing focus on my assets. She recorded conversations where you discussed my property like it was already yours. She tracked $90,000 in loans you never intended to repay. And she built legal protections specifically because she knew this day would come. The silence that followed was profound. Charles cleared his throat. "Mr. Richardson, I should inform you that I'm required to report concerns about undue influence. If your wife was manipulating you through these alleged documents, she wasn't manipulating me, she was protecting me. From them." I pointed at Michael and Rebecca, "and from people like you who profit from family conflicts." "This conversation is over," Charles said, standing. "Michael, Rebecca, I think we should—" "No," Rebecca interrupted. "He needs to understand the consequences of refusing reasonable help. James, if you persist in this hostility toward your family, you'll find yourself very alone. I'd rather be alone with dignity than surrounded by people who see me as an asset to liquidate." After they left, I called Gregory immediately. "They brought a lawyer. They're building a conservatorship case claiming I'm paranoid and making irrational decisions." "Expected," Gregory said calmly. "Email me the recording you just made. And Mr. Richardson, don't worry. Margaret prepared for this too. We'll file for a competency evaluation from an independent physician tomorrow. Your medical records, your management of complex finances, your successful career, it all contradicts their narrative. They're playing chess while your wife left you a manual for the whole game." That night, I couldn't sleep.
The competency evaluation took place on Monday morning at Dr. Elizabeth Chen's office. She was a geriatric psychiatrist with 30 years of experience, completely independent of any party involved in my family dispute. Gregory had insisted on someone with impeccable credentials who couldn't be accused of bias. Dr. Chen was a small woman in her early 60s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She spent 3 hours with me, conducting cognitive tests, reviewing my medical history, discussing my daily routines, and asking pointed questions about my financial management. "Mr. Richardson," she said finally, "you're cognitively sharper than most 50-year-olds I evaluate. Your memory is excellent, your reasoning is sound, and your understanding of complex financial matters is sophisticated. If your children are claiming diminished capacity, they're either mistaken or lying." The latter, I'm afraid. She made notes in her tablet. "I'm required to ask, do you feel you're being coerced or manipulated by anyone?" "Only by my son and daughter-in-law, who want to take my house and warehouse me in a basement apartment they're calling generous." "And you oppose this arrangement?" "Vehemently. This is my home. My late wife and I bought it in 1978 and spent 45 years making it ours. I'm not selling it to fund my son's business ventures." Dr. Chen nodded. "I'll have my report to your attorney by Wednesday. Mr. Richardson, I specialize in elder abuse cases, and what you're describing fits a common pattern: family members using threats of incompetency proceedings to coerce property transfers. My report will make that clear." As I left her office, my phone rang, an unknown local number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Richardson, this is Caroline Winters. I'm a real estate agent with Prestige Properties. I received a cease and desist letter regarding your property, and I wanted to apologize personally for any distress caused." "You don't need to apologize. You didn't know my son had no authority to discuss my property." "Actually, that's why I'm calling. Mr. Richardson, your son came to me 3 weeks ago with a very specific story. He claimed you were suffering from dementia and had given him power of attorney to handle your affairs. He showed me a document that looked official." My grip tightened on the phone. "He showed you a forged power of attorney?" "I don't know if it was forged, but after receiving your attorney's letter, I realized I should have verified it independently. I've been in this business for 22 years, and I've seen elder abuse before. Something about your son's insistence felt wrong, but I didn't listen to my instincts. I'm sorry."
Do you still have that document? I do, and I'm willing to provide it to your attorney as evidence. What your son did, if that power of attorney is false, could be considered fraud. I thanked her and immediately called Gregory with this information. He was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Richardson, if your son forged or backdated a power of attorney document, that's a serious crime. We need to verify its authenticity before making accusations, but this could change everything. How do we verify it? I'll need you to check your files, look for any power of attorney documents you might have signed, any notarized forms. If you didn't sign one, and Michael is claiming you did, we have a problem for him. I spent that afternoon searching through my files. I found medical directives Margaret and I had signed years ago, living wills, the deed to our house, but no general power of attorney giving Michael authority over my property or finances. I called Gregory back with this information. Perfect, or rather perfect for us, terrible for Michael. I'll request that document from Miss Winters and have it examined by a forensic specialist. If it's forged, we're filing a police report. Will that help with the conservatorship threat? Mr. Richardson, if we can prove your son attempted to forge legal documents to claim control over your property, no judge will take his conservatorship petition seriously. It'll be seen for what it is, a predatory attempt to seize assets from a competent adult. That evening, Patricia called. Daddy, Michael is telling everyone you're mentally ill and refusing treatment. He's calling relatives, posting vague things on Facebook about the difficulties of dealing with aging parents. He's building a public narrative. Let him. The truth will come out. Daddy, I need to tell you something. Last night, Michael and Rebecca came to my house. They wanted me to sign an affidavit saying I'd witnessed concerning behavior from you, forgetting conversations, making irrational financial decisions, showing signs of paranoia. What did you tell them? I told them to go to hell. I smiled despite everything. Thank you, sweetheart. I also told them I'd testify on your behalf if they pursue conservatorship, that you're completely competent and their actions are motivated by greed, not concern. Rebecca called me a traitor. Michael said I was choosing you over family. I told him that's exactly what I was doing. After hanging up, I felt a surge of gratitude for my daughter. She'd found her courage finally, risking her relationship with her brother to stand with me. Margaret would have been proud. Wednesday brought Dr. Chen's report. Gregory read it to me over the phone. Patient demonstrates exceptional cognitive function for his age, with no signs of dementia, diminished capacity, or compromised judgment. He manages complex financial affairs independently, maintains a healthy lifestyle, engages in regular social activities, and shows no evidence of being subject to undue influence. Any claims of incompetence appear to be without medical foundation and may represent attempted financial exploitation rather than legitimate concern for patient welfare. It's perfect, Gregory said. Better than I hoped. She basically called out Michael's motives in clinical language. What about the power of attorney document? Even better. My forensic expert confirmed it's forged. The notary whose stamp appears on it retired 2 years before the document's dated. The signature purporting to be yours doesn't match your actual signature, and the document itself uses legal language that changed after the date it claims to be from. It's an amateurish forgery. So what happens now? Now we go on offense. I'm filing a police report today for attempted fraud. I'm also filing a formal response to any conservatorship petition they might file, attaching Dr. Chen's report and evidence of their financial motives. And I'm recommending we send Michael and Rebecca a letter explaining the criminal exposure they now face. The next morning, 2 police detectives arrived at my house. They were professional and thorough. taking my statement about the forged document and Michael's attempts to claim authority over my property. Mr. Richardson, the older detective said, cases like this are more common than you'd think. Adult children forging documents to access elderly parents' assets. We'll investigate thoroughly. By Friday, the situation had escalated beyond anything I anticipated. Michael called, his voice tight with panic. "Dad, the police contacted me about some document. This is insane. You're having your own son investigated? You forged a power of attorney to steal my house. What did you expect?" "I didn't forge anything. Rebecca said she found it in Mom's files and we could use it to help you." Rebecca lied. The document is a forgery, and the police will prove it. You attempted fraud, Michael. That's a crime. The line went silent. Then, "This is Mom's fault. She turned you against us with her paranoid manipulations. She poisoned your mind before she died. Your mother protected me from people who wanted to exploit me. If you can't see the difference, that tells me everything I need to know about who you've become." He hung up without another word. That afternoon, Gregory called with an unexpected news. "Mr. Richardson, Rebecca's attorney contacted me. She wants to negotiate. Apparently, the police investigation has her worried about criminal charges." "What kind of negotiation?" "She's willing to sign a formal statement that she created the forged document without your son's knowledge for an exchange for you not pursuing charges against her personally." "She's throwing Michael under the bus?" "Completely. She claims she found a blank power of attorney form, filled it in herself, and told Michael it was legitimate. She's painting herself as misguided but not criminal, and your son as the victim of her deception." I thought about Michael, about the boy I'd raised, who'd become a man I barely recognized. Part of me wanted to protect him, to accept Rebecca's offer and spare him the consequences. But Margaret's voice echoed in my mind. "Don't let them mistake your kindness for weakness." "No deal."
3 months after the police investigation began, I received a call from an attorney I didn't recognize. "Mr. Richardson, my name is Helen Montrose. I represent the estate planning division at First National Bank. Your wife Margaret established a trust that's reached its activation date. I need to schedule a meeting with you." "What kind of trust?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss details over the phone, but I can tell you that Mrs. Richardson set this up specifically to activate 6 months after her passing. It's quite substantial, and there are specific instructions for how you're to receive this information." We scheduled a meeting for the following Tuesday. I told Patricia about it, and she offered to come with me, but something told me this was meant to be a solitary experience. Margaret had planned it that way. Helen Montrose's office was elegant and professional, filled with leather-bound books and warm lighting. She greeted me with the solemnity of someone delivering important news. "Mr. Richardson, please sit. What I'm about to share with you represents years of planning by your late wife." She opened a file that looked substantial enough to contain a novel. "Margaret Richardson came to me 8 years ago, shortly after your son started his business. She told me she'd seen a pattern emerging in your children's behavior, and she wanted to create a protection mechanism that would only activate if her worst fears came true." "What kind of mechanism?" "A conditional trust with very specific triggers. If, within 6 months of her passing, either of your children attempted to manipulate, coerce, or legally force you to sell your home or transfer assets, certain provisions would activate. Based on the documentation you've provided through Mr. Santos, those triggers have been met." She pulled out a document and slid it across the desk. "This is a trust worth approximately $870,000, built through investments Margaret made over 15 years. The principal beneficiary is you, but there are specific conditions." I stared at the number, unable to process it. How did she accumulate that much? Multiple streams. She inherited money from her aunt's estate in 2008, which she never mentioned to you because she wanted it kept separate. She worked side jobs, as I understand you've discovered, and she made some very shrewd investments in technology stocks in the early 2000s. Margaret was financially brilliant, Mr. Richardson, and she was patient. Helen continued, "The trust has several purposes. First, to ensure you can live comfortably without depending on your children for anything. Second, to fund legal protections if they attempted what they've attempted. And third, to provide a very specific inheritance structure that rewards integrity over entitlement." She pulled out another document. "Your grandchildren, Patricia's children, Marcus and Simone, each receive $100,000 when they turn 25, regardless of their mother's behavior. Margaret wanted to make sure the next generation had opportunities." "And what about Michael's children?" "Michael doesn't have children yet. But the trust includes a provision, if he has children in the future, they'll receive the same benefit once he demonstrates a full year of respecting your boundaries. Margaret wanted to incentivize change, not just punish bad behavior." "And Patricia?" "Patricia receives $50,000 immediately as recognition for standing with you against her brother. Margaret's notes say, if Patricia chooses dignity over greed, reward her immediately. She'll need help, and she'll have earned it." I felt tears building. Margaret had anticipated even this, the possibility that one child might find redemption while the other remained lost to greed. "What about Michael?" Helen's expression became more serious. "Michael receives nothing directly. However, there's a provision that if he spends 2 years respecting your boundaries, apologizing genuinely for his actions, and demonstrating changed behavior, you have the discretion to grant him up to $100,000. Margaret left that decision entirely to you." She made me the judge of his redemption. "Essentially, yes." She wrote in her instructions, "Thomas is too kind to enforce this on his own. Make him the gatekeeper. Let him decide if our son has earned forgiveness." It's brilliant, really. It protects you from manipulation while giving Michael a path to redemption if he's willing to do the work. She pulled out one final document. There's a property deed here. Margaret purchased a small house in Asheville, North Carolina, fully paid off. It's in a retirement community with excellent medical facilities. She wanted you to have options: stay in Richmond, where the memories are, or start fresh somewhere new. Your choice. She thought of everything. She spent 8 years thinking about this, Mr. Richardson. She came to my office quarterly, updating provisions as situations changed, adding protections as new threats emerged. In all my years of estate planning, I've never seen someone so thoroughly prepare for family betrayal. It was clear she loved you deeply and was determined to protect you from people who would exploit that love. I signed the necessary paperwork to access the trust funds, and Helen provided me with account information and contact details for the financial advisor Margaret had selected. As I prepared to leave, she said, "Your wife left you a final letter. She instructed me to give it to you only after explaining the trust provisions. She wanted you to understand the practical protections before reading her emotional reasoning." The envelope was cream-colored and heavy, addressed simply, "My Thomas," in Margaret's distinctive handwriting. I held it carefully, like the precious artifact it was. "Thank you, Ms. Montrose, for everything. It was my honor to help Margaret protect you. She was an extraordinary woman." I drove to Margaret's favorite park, the one where we used to walk on Sunday afternoons. I sat on our bench, overlooking the pond where ducks glided across still water, and read her final letter. "My dearest Thomas, if you're reading this, you've discovered the full extent of my planning. I imagine you're overwhelmed, perhaps angry that I kept so much secret. Let me explain why I did things this way. 8 years ago, I saw our son begin to change. Small things at first, calculating comments about property values, questions about your retirement accounts that felt invasive rather than caring. I watched Rebecca enter our family and amplify those tendencies, turning financial planning into financial scheming. I considered telling you then, but I knew your nature. You would have confronted them, tried to fix things, given them chances to change. And they would have learned to hide their intentions better, to manipulate more subtly. I needed to let the pattern fully emerge so you could see it clearly. The hardest part was watching them hurt you while I built protections in silence. Every loan request that wouldn't be repaid, every boundary they crossed, every time they treated you like an asset rather than a person, it broke my heart. But I documented it all, built defenses for you, and waited for the inevitable moment when they would show their true faces. I'm sorry I had to love you this way, from the shadows, with secrets and strategies instead of simple affection. But I know you, Thomas. You needed to see their betrayal with your own eyes before you could defend yourself. You needed permission to set boundaries, evidence that you weren't being cruel or unreasonable. The money I've left you isn't just for security, it's for freedom. Freedom to live exactly as you choose, without depending on children who see you as a burden or an inheritance. Freedom to help the people you want to help, including Patricia if she proves herself worthy. And freedom to let Michael go if he refuses to change. Don't feel guilty about enforcing these boundaries. Don't let anyone convince you that protecting yourself is selfish. You've earned the right to dignity in your final years, and I've simply ensured you have the resources to claim it. Live fully, my love. Travel if you want. Stay home if you prefer. Help people who deserve it. And remember that the greatest gift you can give our grandchildren is the example of self-respect, even when it costs you relationships with their parents. I wish I could be there to see you stand tall in the face of their greed, but I'll be watching from wherever souls go after this life ends, proud of the man I loved for 47 years, grateful that I got to spend my life with someone worth protecting. Forever yours, Margaret. I sat on that bench for a long time, reading her words over and over until I had them memorized. People passed by, joggers, families with children, elderly couples holding hands, and I wondered if any of them carried secrets like Margaret had, building invisible fortresses around the people they loved. That evening I called Patricia and told her about the trust, about her inheritance, about Margaret's provisions for her children. She cried quietly on the phone. Mom really saw everything, didn't she? She knew I'd struggle, knew I'd almost fail, but believed I'd find my way back. She did, and she was right. What about Michael? He has a path to redemption if he wants it, but it requires 2 years of changed behavior. No manipulation, no schemes, just genuine respect and apology. He'll never do it. He's too proud. Then that's his choice. We can't force growth on people who refuse it. After hanging up, I walked through my house, touching the
18 months after Margaret's death, I stood in my garden on an October morning, pruning the roses she'd planted decades ago. The rhythm of the work was meditative, each careful cut a small act of preservation and care. I'd learned this from Margaret, that tending growing things required both nurturing and strategic removal of what didn't serve the plant's health. The sound of a car pulling into my driveway interrupted my thoughts. I looked up to see Michael's vehicle, now a modest sedan rather than the Mercedes he'd driven during his ambitious phase. He sat in the driver's seat for several minutes before emerging, and when he did, I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, and not in a healthy way. His expensive clothes had been replaced with simple jeans and a polo shirt. Most striking was his expression. No confidence, no calculation, just exhaustion, and something that might have been humility. "Dad," he said quietly, staying near his car like he was ready to flee if I ordered him away. "I know I have no right to be here. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I did, and I'm sorry." I set down my pruning shears and studied my son. 18 months ago, I would have welcomed this immediately, desperate for reconciliation. But Margaret had taught me to look deeper, to distinguish between apology and manipulation. "What do you understand?" I asked carefully. Michael took a shaky breath. "I understand that I treated you like a retirement plan instead of my father, that I let Rebecca's ambition and my own insecurity turn me into someone who would forge documents and threaten his own dad with conservatorship, that I valued money and status over integrity and family." He paused, voice breaking. "And I understand that Mom saw it happening years before I did, and instead of hating me for it, she built protections for you because she knew I'd hurt you eventually." Where's this coming from? Therapy. Lots of therapy. The divorce from Rebecca was ugly, and I lost everything in it. The business, the house in Oakwood Heights, most of my savings. I ended up in a small apartment, working a regular job for the first time in a decade. And one night, sitting alone in that apartment, I realized I'd burned down my entire life, chasing money I didn't earn. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I've been going to group therapy for adult children who've exploited their parents. There's a whole community of us, Dad. People who wake up one day and realize they've become predators in their own families. It's been the hardest year of my life, facing what I did to you." I gestured toward the porch. "Sit down. Tell me about this therapy." We sat in the chairs where Margaret and I had shared countless evening conversations, and Michael told me about his journey, the group therapy sessions where he'd heard stories worse than his own and stories heartbreakingly similar, the individual counseling where he'd traced his behavior back to insecurity about his career, his marriage, his worth as a man, the painful process of writing apology letters to me that he'd never sent because his therapist said he wasn't ready yet, that he was still making excuses. "What changed?" I asked. "Why are you ready now?" "Last month, one of the guys in my therapy group killed himself, left a note saying he couldn't live with what he'd done to his mother, how he'd stolen her savings and abandoned her in a nursing home. At his funeral, his siblings wouldn't even look at each other. The family was just destroyed. And I realized I was headed toward that same ending if I didn't actually change, not just talk about changing." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "I wrote you a letter. My therapist helped me make sure it was genuine apology without excuses. I'm not asking you to read it now or respond to it. I just need you to have it." I took the letter but didn't open it. "Michael, your mother left provisions in her trust. If you spent 2 years respecting my boundaries and demonstrating real change, I could grant you some inheritance. Did you know about that?" He looked genuinely confused. "No, how would I know that?" "Patricia might have told you, or you might have hired someone to investigate the trust." "I haven't talked to Patricia about this stuff in months. She made it clear she chose your side, and honestly, I'm glad she did. Someone needed to." He met my eyes directly. "Dad, I'm not here for money. I don't deserve money from you. I'm here because my therapist said I needed to apologize face to face if I ever wanted to sleep through the night again." I studied him carefully, looking for signs of performance or manipulation. I'd gotten better at detecting it over the past 18 months, learning from Margaret's documented observations. But Michael's body language was open. His distress seemed genuine, and most tellingly, he hadn't asked for anything. "I'm not ready to forgive you yet," I said honestly. "What you did caused me real harm. The betrayal, the forged documents, the threats, that doesn't just disappear because you feel bad about it now." I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I see it now, what I became, and I'm trying to be someone different." We sat in silence for a while, watching leaves drift down from the oak tree in my front yard. Finally, I said, "Your mother believed in redemption. She built in a path for you to earn back some relationship with me, but she made me the judge of whether you'd really changed. That was smart. She knew you'd be fairer than she would have been." I smiled slightly. She was angrier than I was, that's true. She'd been watching you longer, seeing patterns I'd missed. I paused. "Michael, if you're serious about change, here's what it looks like. No contact with me except monthly check-ins where you update me on your therapy and your life. No asking for anything, no hinting at financial struggles, no attempts to rebuild relationship faster than I'm comfortable with. Can you do that?" "Yes. And you need to write genuine apology letters to the people you hurt. Carolyn Winters, the real estate agent you lied to, the notary whose stamp you misused, Patricia for putting her in an impossible position. Can you do that?" "I've already written to some of them. Miss Winters wrote back saying she appreciated the apology. The notary didn't respond. I understand why." "Good. Keep doing that work. And Michael, understand this. Even if you do everything right, I might never fully trust you again. What you did broke something fundamental. You can't unbreak it, only work around it." He nodded, tears streaming down his face openly now. "I know. Thank you for even listening to me. That's more than I deserve." After Michael left, I sat on the porch for a long time, thinking about Margaret's wisdom in creating that 2-year boundary. She knew that genuine change took time, that quick apologies meant nothing without sustained behavioral change. By making me wait 2 years to grant any inheritance, she'd forced both Michael and me to sit with the consequences, to not rush toward false reconciliation. I called Patricia that evening and told her about Michael's visit. "Do you think he means it?" she asked. "I think he's starting to mean it. Whether he can sustain it for 2 years remains to be seen." "I'm proud of you, Daddy, for not just accepting his first apology and pretending everything's fine." "Your mother taught me that. She taught me a lot of things." 6 months later, Michael maintained his monthly check-ins. He'd moved to a smaller town, taken a job managing a warehouse, and continued his therapy. He never asked for money or pushed for more contact. His updates were brief and honest. Progress reports from someone doing hard internal work. Patricia and her children had become regular fixtures in my life. Her daughter Simone was considering nursing school, inspired by her mother's dedication to helping people. Her son Marcus talked about studying business, but the ethical kind he emphasized, not the kind that hurt people. I'd used some of Margaret's trust money to fund a scholarship at the community center where she'd volunteered, specifically for immigrant families navigating citizenship processes. The Margaret Richardson Memorial Scholarship would help 20 families over the next decade, continuing the work she'd done quietly for years. On the anniversary of Margaret's death, I opened the final envelope she'd left, the one labeled, "Open when you're ready to forgive." Inside was a short note in her handwriting. "Thomas, if you're reading this, you've done the hard work of setting boundaries and watching people react to them. Some past the